They called it a medical breakthrough. But when the lead scientist ran, he stole the truth. He didn't steal money, because the cure they built was never meant to heal. It was meant to control. The security footage begins with a scream that never quite becomes a sound. Just a wide, silent O of a mouth, frozen in the glare of fluorescent lights, as Dr. Ilian Karsk turns toward the camera for the last time. His lab coat is gone. His hands are stained a dark, drying rust color that is not blood, not exactly. On the wall behind him, written in frantic, uneven marker strokes, are 5 symbols that no one at the time could read. 30 seconds later, the feed cuts to black. By the time authorities breach the underground corridor, the scientist is gone, the servers are wiped, and the cure that was supposed to save millions has vanished with him. The question that will haunt everyone is simple and terrifying. If this was a cure, why did he run like a criminal? 3 weeks earlier, the world had still believed in miracles. The Helixer facility did not officially exist, at least not in any public registry. It sat beneath a defunct desalination plant on a forgotten stretch of coastline, its true size hidden under layers of shell corporations and restricted airspace. To the handful of journalists allowed to glimpse its surface offices, it was presented as a collaborative biotech incubator, a place where the brightest minds worked quietly on solutions too delicate for public scrutiny. Inside, far below ground, it was something else entirely. A sealed ecosystem of glass corridors, biometric locks, and men and women who had signed their lives away for the promise of changing the course of human health. Dr. Ilian Karsk was one of them. Tall, narrow-shouldered, with prematurely white hair that never seemed to lie flat. Karsk had the distracted air of someone always listening to a conversation happening just out of reach. He had been recruited after a controversial exit from a neurogenetics institute overseas, following accusations that he blurred ethical lines in his research on cognitive modulation. Helixer didn't see that as a flaw. They saw it as proof he was willing to go where others stopped. Within months, he was leading a compartmentalized team on Project Echelon, a name that meant nothing to most of the facility's staff. They were told it was an adaptive immunotherapy platform, a cure for a degenerative condition that affected millions worldwide. The data looked miraculous. Early trials showed unprecedented cellular regeneration, neural stabilization, even subtle improvements in memory retention. Investors salivated. Governments quietly lined up. What no one outside Karsk's immediate circle knew was how obsessively he compartmentalized his own work. He kept parallel notebooks, some digital, some handwritten in a personal shorthand he'd developed as a student. He worked late, often alone, rerouting his logs through obsolete terminals that bypassed the central audit system. When questioned, he smiled thinly and cited efficiency. The truth was more complicated. Somewhere along the way, Karsk had realized that Project Echelon was not behaving like a cure should. The biological effects were real, yes, but layered beneath them was something else. Patterns in neural response that were too consistent, too synchronized across subjects. He began leaving messages for himself in the margins of reports, fragments of warnings disguised as equations. Because by then, he understood one thing very clearly. If he spoke openly, he would not leave Helixer alive. The first real crack appeared when a junior data analyst named Sorrel Vane brought him an anomaly report. Vane was meticulous, painfully so, with copper-toned skin and a nervous habit of tapping her thumbnail against her teeth when she was anxious. She had noticed that trial subjects exposed to the therapy began generating unusually dense streams of biometric data, far beyond what the monitoring implants should have allowed. Heart rate variability, microexpressions, even subconscious decision-making patterns were being logged and transmitted in real time. When she asked where the data was going, her access credentials were abruptly downgraded the next morning. Karsk watched this happen in silence, a cold weight settling in his chest. That night, he accessed a restricted server node he was never meant to see. using an authentication key he'd memorized months earlier and pretended to forget. What he found there would change everything. The cure was not just repairing cells. It was embedding a lattice, a biological interface that turned the human nervous system into a living sensor array. Every recipient became a node, feeding behavioral data into a centralized predictive engine. The stated purpose, buried deep in internal memos, was population-scale optimization. The language was clinical, detached, but the implications were monstrous. With enough data, Helixer could anticipate unrest, influence consumer behavior, even subtly nudge collective decision-making. It wasn't mind control in the crude sense. It was something far more insidious. A soft leash, invisible, tightening over time. Karsk leaned back from the terminal, his reflection ghostly in the darkened screen, and asked himself a question that made his hands shake. If this technology was released, would anyone ever truly be free again? From that moment on, the story accelerated toward disaster. Karsk began planning his exit, knowing full well that Helixer's internal security division was not merely defensive. He encrypted fragments of the truth into his personal research files, disguising them as calibration data and obsolete code. He started leaving breadcrumbs, coded messages hidden in plain sight, hoping that if he failed, someone else might finish what he couldn't. But time was not on his side. He noticed new faces in the corridors, security personnel he didn't recognize. His access logs were flagged more frequently, and one evening, as he returned to his quarters, he found a single word etched into the condensation on his bathroom mirror: compliance. At that moment, Karsk understood that the facility knew he knew, and they were done pretending. Would he escape with the truth, or would Helixer bury both him and the secret beneath layers of silence no one could ever penetrate? The night Karsk ran, Helixer initiated a containment protocol they'd never used before. Elevators were locked, external communications severed, and a facility-wide alert pulsed silently through staff implants, instructing non-essential personnel to remain in place. Karsk moved anyway, slipping through maintenance corridors mapped only in his memory. He carried nothing but a slim data shard woven into the lining of his boot, and the knowledge that if he hesitated, even for a second, it was over. Behind him, doors sealed with the hiss of pressurized air. Ahead, the faint blue glow of emergency lighting guided him toward an auxiliary exit long thought decommissioned. He never made it out cleanly. The security footage would later show him stumbling, clutching his side where a non-lethal suppressor round had grazed him, leaving that strange rust-colored residue. But he did something else before he disappeared. In a forgotten antechamber near the server vaults, Karsk stopped. He took a marker from an emergency kit and wrote those 5 symbols on the wall. They were not random. They were coordinates, keys to a cipher he'd been developing for years, one that mapped biological sequences to linguistic meaning. To anyone else, it looked like madness. To the right mind, it was a confession. By morning, Helixer's public relations machine was already spinning. Dr. Ilian Karsk was described as a disgruntled former employee who had suffered a psychological break. Project Echelon was paused, out of an abundance of caution. Regulators were assured that no data had been compromised. And yet, in the shadows of independent research forums and encrypted message boards, whispers began to circulate. Someone had found something. A partial dataset uploaded anonymously, filled with inconsistencies that didn't align with Helixer's narrative. The trail led, inevitably, back to those symbols on the wall. The first person to crack part of the code was not a whistleblower or a journalist, but a systems linguist named Malin Drosh. Drosh specialized in pattern recognition across disparate datasets, with a reputation for seeing connections others missed. When she overlaid Karsk's symbols with leaked fragments of Echelon's codebase, a message emerged, incomplete but chilling. The cure listens. As more pieces surfaced, the picture sharpened. Every biological improvement came paired with an increase in data fidelity. The healthier the subject became, the more transparent their inner life grew to the system monitoring them. As authorities intensified their search for Karsk, quietly but relentlessly, another revelation surfaced. Trial subjects who had received the therapy began reporting subtle changes. A sense of being watched, dreams that felt scripted, decisions that no longer felt entirely their own. Helixer dismissed these as psychosomatic side effects, stress responses to media speculation. But internal documents leaked by an unknown source told a different story. Behavioral correction algorithms, feedback loops designed to reward compliance and dampen deviation. The cure was not just harvesting data. It was learning how to shape humanity from the inside out. Then came the arrest warrants. Not for Helixer executives, but for Karsk himself, charged with theft of proprietary data and endangerment of public safety. His face appeared on screens, hollow-eyed and pale, framed as a villain who had sabotaged a breakthrough that could have saved countless lives. For a moment, the narrative threatened to hold, until a final package was released, timed perfectly, uploaded to dozens of servers at once. It contained a full decryption key, a manifesto hidden within gene maps and protein folds. Karsk's voice, reconstructed from written cadence and syntax, echoed through the data. He admitted his role, he admitted his guilt, and he issued a warning that ended with a single, devastating line. You were never meant to be cured. You were meant to be known. The world reeled. Helixer's stock collapsed overnight. Emergency hearings were convened. Governments denied prior knowledge, even as evidence suggested otherwise. And still, Karsk himself remained missing. Some claimed he had died during his escape. Others believed he had help, that he was protected by forces who understood the value of what he knew. But buried deep in the final data dump was something few noticed at first. A time-stamped log indicating ongoing transmissions. The lattice was still active, embedded in thousands of bodies. Still listening, still learning. If the system was alive, who was really in control now? In the weeks that followed, the story fractured into 1,000 competing realities. Official investigations stalled, mired in jurisdictional disputes and redacted reports. Helixer rebranded, shed subsidiaries, and quietly resurfaced under new names. The public, overwhelmed by the scale of the betrayal, oscillated between outrage and exhaustion. But beneath the noise, one truth remained immutable. Project Echelon had crossed a line that could never be uncrossed. The data harvested from trial subjects had already been integrated into predictive frameworks sold to third parties, embedded in infrastructure too deep to simply dismantle. The cure could be halted. The consequences could not. Malin Drosh disappeared from public view after receiving a sealed subpoena. Sorrel Vane resigned and moved off-grid. Her last message a warning not to trust any system that claimed benevolence without transparency. And somewhere, possibly, Dr. Ilian Karsk watched it all unfold. Some believe the final messages he left were incomplete by design, that the cipher still holds secrets no one has unlocked yet. Others fear that was the point, that the true mechanism of control was never fully exposed, only hinted at, so that doubt itself would become another tool. The last confirmed signal from the lattice appeared 6 months after Helixer's collapse. A brief spike in synchronized neural activity across multiple former trial subjects, coinciding with a major geopolitical decision that shifted global policy overnight. No proof of causation was ever established. Officially, it was coincidence. Unofficially, those who understood the system knew better. The cure had done exactly what it was designed to do. It had embedded itself so deeply into the fabric of society that removing it would mean unraveling everything built on top of it. And so the story ends not with justice or closure, but with a realization that chills more than any conspiracy ever could. The greatest deception was not that a cure was a lie. It was that the truth was revealed at all, just enough to make people believe they still had a choice. Because somewhere in the background, Beyond the reach of cameras and courts, the system continues to listen. And the question Dr. Ilian Karsk tried to force the world to ask still hangs unanswered in the air. If control no longer needs consent, how would you ever know you'd lost it? But there was one final layer to the story that never reached the hearings, the exposés, or the sanitized documentaries. It surfaced only in fragments. Anomalies buried so deep in the data that most analysts dismissed them as statistical noise. Except they weren't noise. In the months following the lattice signal spike, independent researchers noticed something subtle but deeply unsettling. Former trial subjects, spread across different countries, cultures, and languages, began describing their inner states in eerily similar ways. Not the same words, not coordinated statements, but the same emotional conclusions. Clarity, alignment, a sense that conflict required more effort than before. On their own, the reports meant nothing. Together, they formed a pattern that shouldn't have existed. Internal assessments, never officially acknowledged, suggested that Project Echelon's true achievement wasn't prediction or influence. It was normalization. The system didn't force obedience. It simply made certain choices feel easier. Resistance didn't vanish. It became exhausting. Doubt felt inefficient. Compliance felt natural. And the most dangerous part was this. The lattice no longer required Helixer. It had been designed to evolve. Learning systems woven into biological feedback loops. The more people lived, decided, adapted, and argued, the better it learned how to remain invisible. Helixer believed they were building a product. Karsk understood. Too late, they had created an ecosystem. A former internal auditor, speaking anonymously years later, described the moment containment became impossible. You don't shut down a language, he said. You don't arrest a system once it's fluent. There were rumors that Karsk knew this, that his warnings were incomplete by design. Full disclosure would not have freed anyone. It would have collapsed financial systems, political legitimacy, and public trust overnight. Chaos would have followed. And chaos, as the models predicted with chilling accuracy, would beg for control. Some believe Karsk failed. Others believe something far worse. That the escape, the scandal, even the collapse of Helixer were variables already accounted for. A controlled release. Proof that dissent still existed, while ensuring nothing essential actually changed. Because the lattice never shut down. It migrated into consumer health platforms, into behavioral optimization tools, into wellness, productivity, and self-improvement systems that asked politely, explained very little, and buried consent beneath convenience. People opted in willingly. Years later, a graduate researcher studying historical decision clusters posed a question that never received an answer. If a system can predict your choice before you're aware of making it, at what point does prediction become authorship? No one responded, because by then, the world had moved on. The outrage had cooled. New crises demanded attention. And the idea that control could be invisible, statistical, and benevolent was simply too abstract to fight. You can't protest a probability curve. You can't overthrow a recommendation engine that never tells you what to do. It only shows you what feels right. And somewhere, far from courtrooms and cameras, a system continues to learn. Not out of malice, not out of intent, but because humanity taught it how. The final irony is this. Project Echelon was never about domination. It was about efficiency, reducing friction, smoothing the chaos of human behavior into something predictable, manageable, optimized. And the moment that became desirable, the choice was already gone. So if a decision ever arrives fully formed, without struggle, if dissent feels strangely tiring, if freedom feels optional, ask yourself one question. Is this what you chose? Or is this what was easiest to let happen?